Hello, everyone. This is Paul Casey, the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame Educational Video Series. We usually discuss topics of Kenpo with our Hall of Fame members, but recently we've deviated a little bit and we've went off on subjects that are pertinent to Kenpo, and those are from Kenpo practitioners. Looking at the art of war is one series. We'll continue with that. And also a new series, which is called The Art of Forms, Kenpo style. So that'll be our discussion. And with everyone that's here today, I'm going to try to make sure that we all are part of it. I'm going to use some references. So the best thing to do is start off with Mr. Parker's encyclopedia. Now, this publication came out after his passing. However, it still is relevant because we're going to talk about it and use it as a base. The other book that I will be using is Infinite Insights, Volume 5, and that came out before he passed away in 1980. I want to say 85, 86. I'll have to look at the exact date. Mr. Parker talks about forms. He says, in literally a short story of motion, it consists of basic movements of offense and defense incorporated into a dance-like routine for the purposes of exercising, training without a partner, or training at home. It is an index of movements that give specific answers as well as speculative interpretations to combat situations. Mr. Parker divided his art into three parts. We all know the basics, self-defense techniques, and freestyle. And we divide freestyle is actually really one of the reasons we can discuss this as well as basics. And when we get into this, we'll have a little more deeper discussion on it. I think it crosses into both. I like the concept that when you break down, which I learned from Senior Master of the Arts, Dennis Knatzer, that you have training by yourself in freestyle, which is no person but you. So there's no contact. Then there's two people, and you can still engage, but there is no contact. Then you can have light contact, medium contact, full contact, and then street fighting or real life. Okay, so let's discuss why it's important to understand the principles of forms in the Kenpo system, how they developed, what are the pertinent things that come from each of them, and are they relative to what we need in Kenpo today? So let's open it up there. Let's start off, and I already read the definition, the encyclopedia of Kenpo. So with no further ado, Mr. Knatzer, I'm going to unmute you. Why don't you join us here and give us your interpretation of the forms and where they came from?
Well, you know, probably most people today know that first four forms, Mr. Parker considered the dictionaries, short three and beyond, the encyclopedias, and the sets are the appendices. And so the first four forms are basically defining your base movements. Of course, we can go into a talk on that if you want. The short three and beyond, of course, are become the technique forms, that are involved with techniques, and the appendices basically pull out the basics and review them. For example, we have stances, stance set, blocks and strikes, striking set, finger techniques, finger set, kicks, kicking set. Then we have, a coordination set, just on top of that, just some, a general coordination form 1 and 2, and it's the same thing, we have blocking set 1 and 2, kicking set 1 and 2, and so, that's kind of the basic thing. It's kind of interesting if you break into it, depending on how much you want to go into those. But
so let's talk about the history of the forms. How did they come about in the Kenpo system?
Well, to my knowledge, I wasn't back there in the 50s, but to my knowledge, I think Jimmy Wing Woo did have a fair amount of influence on developing the layered system of the forms. Short one is there, it layers next to long one. Short two is layered on the ones. Long two is then layered on those, and then we break into the techniques. And I think Jimmy Wing Woo, I think, was the one that was one, if not Ark Wong and a couple others, that actually influenced the Chinese methodology of kind of layering forms from beginner forms on up.
Okay. So they came about and they were based on what, the techniques at the time?
Well, again, the first four forms he considers the dictionaries. And by dictionaries, when you go to a dictionary, for example, you go look for the space shuttle, and you'll get a definition on, a vehicle used to travel space, etc. Then, when you go to the encyclopedia of the space shuttle, you'll find all the missions, the astronauts, the failures, the payloads, the purposes, so on and so forth. Then, if you want to take a specific, like for example, what's the space tile, you know, on one of them, then you would go to an appendix to find further information on a specific part of the shuttle. And the forms are basically the same thing. You start with the short form one, just to give a brief explanation on the definition. You're learning to, number one, retreat, step back, and then block with the lead leg, and block with the front arm. So you step back and then block with the front arm. And then long one breaks into three parts. And I'm kind of giving the super Reader's Digest version here. But you step back and you build on short form one, you do the same thing, but then you add a punch off the rear arm. And then, of course, long one then at the last inward or downward block steps into the opponent instead of stepping away. And so you, for the first time you're stepping in, at which case short two picks up. The twos all step forward and
Well,
block.
let's stay with one for right now.
Okay.
Okay. What is the common thread of form one, short form one?
Well, short form one is basically blocking with the lead arm, stepping, retreating and blocking with the lead arm.
What should the practitioner be focusing on?
What I have my guys focus on is, number one, you've got several components. Footwork is critical. Body rotation, arm rotation, rotation in general is one of my one of the keys to our system to developing power. Rotation is basically a play on the width zones. You got height, width, and depth, and so stepping back, you've got learning to step back with depth, getting away from your opponent, creating distance, and then blocking with the lead arm. And then you're doing that. The first one you step back 180 degrees. The second one you step 145. So you're changing angles. So you're learning things, but basically working on good horse development form. While you're getting into it now, there's a question on today. A lot of people's horses look like teepees, and if you go back and look at Chuck Sullivan and Mr. Parker doing the two-man set back when he was young, and really training like most of us are with most beginners, because seriously, most of us are training beginners for the most part. That's not always the case, but you look at his form, he's got great stances. And the stances are there. I mean, it's called a training horse for a reason. And so you should have your knees bent. I have my guys do it a little overemphasized, knees bent, shoulders, straight, butt down, knees pushed out toward 3 and 9. A lot of people don't do that. You're supposed to look like it was called a riding horse position or a horse riding position at one time. So you should see that U, or sometimes, kind of a square like an N, stance development in there, and that's when you do it correctly and your feet are straight ahead, you'll feel it in your quadriceps, the front of your legs, the top, and you'll feel it along the sides of your legs from the knee to the ankle down. And that's what you're developing, is that stance. Because stance is critical. No matter what you are, stance is, one of your two critical components to everything. The most important is footwork. Like Mr. Parker said, hey, oftentimes, before you can do any movements, you've got to be able to maneuver into position. And so, foot maneuvers are in essence the most critical. of the basics. And then of course stance is second. Then after, I think when he asked me that question, I think I told him blocks. And of course, then he informed me what the correct answer was.
Which
But,
I've
you
talked
know,
to you about before, which I think
sure.
is foundation. Foundation is essential to everything. You don't have a good foundation, you can't stand correctly, you can't thwart an attack. So I'm going to go over to somebody that had a lot of training in that. His teacher was adamant about Kenpo principles and of motion. And we're going to talk to Derek Hibben right now. So Derek, give us an insight to what the teachings of Huck Planus were regarding your forms.
Painful. I'm kidding.
No, you're not. No,
Yeah,
no, you're not.
no, I'm not. He many a times he was in our shop and would reach for the shinai or the closest stick that he had. And I think one of the biggest problems I see in forms, and a lot of it comes from having Huck as not only my instructor but also my uncle, is all the added footwork, all the stutter steps, all of the, it's just, there's no root basics in forms anymore. And I see a lot of guys with bars and stripes doing demonstrations of it, and I totally get it and understand and respect, especially how you present to a panel or even to a tournament board. You know, you tell someone, hey, if I have an ailment, I'm going to be doing this differently or changing this, or I have like, I hurt my knee, I'm going to be adding some footwork here. But there's a lot of people out there on the internet, especially, that just don't move the way that they're supposed to. And I can remember being so ready to test for my black belt. I had 4 downs so good. I mean, my dad gave me the seal of approval. Frank gave me the seal of approval, and he's like, "Oh, you're gonna do so good. You're gonna as soon as I get in front of Huck," he said, "Let's see short one." And like, thank God, him and I spent hours, and I mean, days. Anybody who's worked with Huck knows this. I mean, you'll spend an entire day just on the salutation, an entire day just on correcting your short form one. He's, you know, the closest that I could probably put next to him would be Yosh when it comes to just really hammering those basics and those rudimental fundamentals that the art's based on. You know, I was always taught and told, you know, by several seniors that if they could have it their way, if they could teach the system their way, they would get rid of a side horse. They would only teach the forms and only a few of the sets, because the root of the system is all in there. Like Dennis Canester was hinting on and hitting to, that the encyclopedia is there, all the fundamentals are there, even our category, like everything is within that. I think there's a whole lot of us though that just like to bang and hit on each other really hard, that I don't think we'd have it any other way.
Beautiful. Let's go down to Shane. Shane, I'm gonna unmute you. Guy, why don't you jump in here, and why don't you give us your thoughts on teaching short one? Can you do that, sir?
I think I would rather just listen.
No. That doesn't work here.
Mr. Farnsworth would be a way better candidate to be talking about this. I don't know if you all have seen this guy do forms, but this Mr. Farnsworth can do the forms.
That's why we
very
went
well.
to you, sir. We like to ask you your thoughts. Let's take base. Let's just take short form one. What are your thoughts on
Okay. Well, honestly, I think it's the most complicated form for me to do, physical wise. To get that form to just 9 moves is extremely hard. It's difficult for me to do that without stutter stepping, picking my heel up. I'm still working on it. I actually like the way my long forward looks better than my short one, and that's just being honest with you. Because Jason's constantly busting me for not planting my heels down properly at the right time, right depth, right height, all that. And it's hard to do for me, man. It is. It's hard, and it still seems like to this day I can't step through reverse properly.
Hmm.
Not according to Jason, anyways. I cannot do a step through reverse properly.
It's okay. When I was coming up, one of the techniques that was to help me with the forms and focus on the foundation, because the analogy is in music, if you learn to play a piano, you try to learn your left hand first, the bass line, so you have it. Then your right hand comes in, so then it can do the melody. And when you're doing the left hand, you don't think about it. That's sort of the analogy that was given to me regarding the foundation. The other thing, which is funny, is that coming up in '79, before Mr. Parker's book came out, and he quotes here, he says, practice the form with your eyes closed to gain a better, quote, feel, capitalized, for your stances. And again, I'll repeat that. Practice it with your eyes closed, and just have the feel. Sort of like in the middle of the night, you're walking from your bed to go to the bathroom or go where, and you got to sort of have a sense of where you're at so you don't have problems. And the other thing that I put in the equation in the training is I take my hands and I cross my chest. That way it's not there. Now, if you go back to Mr. Parker's Secrets of Chinese Karate, he says put the hands on the hips. I personally think it's better here because then I want to think about all this stuff. Here means there's no arms involved. So with that in mind, let's go and move over here to Jason, and Jason can give us an insight of how he feels about the forms and the focus for him. Jason, welcome. Talk to us.
Thank you. I personally work forms every day, in one way, shape, or form or another. To go off of what Shane was saying, trying to get people to solidify a base, not break the heel when they move, and get the proper depth with the stance rather than being too deep, even being too wide. It's a constant focus in where I teach, the people that I do teach, to relate it to delayed sword or alternate maces or aggressive twins and all that, because all that stems from your forms, the very first move. So whether you're working the first technique in the system, the first form in the system, everything goes hand in hand. And it's extremely difficult to do. As Shane was mentioning earlier today, we were busting out form 4 all over the place. And I said, okay, well, now let's go back to short 1. Let's make these 9 moves. Let's make sure we get the proper depth, solidify the base, and before we move on. And it's extremely difficult for everybody to do, no matter what.
What techniques do you use, sir, to assist your student or yourself to solidify the movements to be proper?
Very interesting to note. My very first lesson with Doc Chappelle. I don't know how many of you guys have been on the mat with Doc, but our very first class was 5.5 hours long. 4 of it was stepping back to a neutral bow. That was it. The first 4 hours was actually stepping back to a neutral bow. I had been in the Kenpo system for, I'm not sure how many years previous to that point, but that was actually probably the best lesson I had had on stances alone. So I actually used that idea to portray to my students as well, which is step back, drop your stance, look down, are you toe heel, are you depth wise, and then drop knee to heel to see if you're actually in the proper stance before we move on. And we do that constantly. That's what I do with my students, to make sure we're not too deep, because then you can't move. If you try to fight when you're too deep, you can't move. If you try to do a technique, you can't move or move as effectively as you were mentioning earlier in the lesson here. But it's vitally important to do that.
I was down in at a seminar not about a year and a half ago, and we wanted to engage in a Friday night class, a simulated Pasadena style Friday night class. And while I was doing it, we're going through some of the basic moves. stances, blocks, punch kicks, as if it was being taught by one of the seniors. And one of the students that was there dropped into a very deep, I would consider close to like a Taekwondo style of stance. And I grabbed out the old staff, which was standing against the wall, and I put it between their legs on the floor. And I said, do you understand how wide your stance is? It's in Kenpo, it's incorrect. And their answer to me was, well, I just really feel comfortable doing this. I've gotten used to doing it this way. I said, do you smoke? Nothing against me smoking. I said, she goes, no. I said, well, it's sort of like smoking. It'll sneak up on you when you least expect it, and then you're in trouble. Okay. So you need to clear that up. I said, if you want reference, go to Mr. Parker's books and see his stances. He was a big man, but his stances were always true to form. Now, true later in his life, he was having issues with physical issues that we gained. He had gout and other issues later on. But the point is if you, as Mr. Knatzer was referencing, his stances were impeccable in the beginning because that's how he was trained. So he adapted, and that's the thing about Kenpo. We can adapt, but if you can, you should try to make sure that you train to do it the correct way. And I'm going to go right over to Zachary Carter to give us an insight what it's like to train with the senior and what it's like to have a lesson in proper stances. Hello, Zach.
Oh my God. I guess you must be talking about Luis Solis or Mr. Frank Trejo.
I would like to talk about either one or both.
Both of them were pretty much the same way because they both came up, Mr. Solis came up a lot earlier, but they both came out of Pasadena, and stances were hammered into me. In short form one, I've seen them. They did it to me. They did it to other people. They could take a black belt and humble them with just short form one. So when Derek was talking about that earlier, I could sure relate to it because there's so many things hidden in short form one. And Mr. Knatzer can best describe all the biomechanics of that because it's really interesting. But one of the things I was always hammered on, and I don't want to say it out loud, is my stances. Make sure you're in proper stances. And having the staff and everything was used constantly, and using drills with Mr. Trejo would be called like a boxing drill, walking the line, which is what you're doing with short form one in those movements. So it's very important to learn to move and move your body correctly. And short form one is the foundation for that, and the foundation of the system that everything else is added on to.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. Let's move on down to Todd Durgan and get him involved with it. Todd is, he has been around for a while. If you listen to him, get a chance, go and visit his website. There's some great insights into Kenpo, and I'm very honored that share a lot of time talking to him as well as Mr. Knatzer on these principles. So, Todd, we're talking about forms, Kenpo style, and the issues are the importance, relevance, and what do you see? So what is the importance of learning Kenpo forms?
Well, so the thing I haven't heard anybody talk about yet, and that's only probably because I came in late, because I see a lot, is the transit, and everybody's talked about being in proper stance, but I haven't heard anybody really talk about, like I said, I came in late, the transition and how to get there. One of the things that I see a lot that people practice, and I say practice because that's exactly what you do when you practice your forms, is you're practicing everything that you're doing, whether good or bad, right? And practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So one of the most common things that I see in all ranks and all walks of life is the transitions. There's always a telegraph. There's always a weight shift or a foot shift before a step through or reverse step through or a cover, which is a telegraph. Now, it sounds minuscule or myopic, but when
give us an example. Talk us through it.
Okay, so for example, and I've seen this at a lot of different tests. Person's going into a reverse step through from the first move in short form one. You drop back to your right neutral bow, right execute a right inward block. The next move, inevitably, is a right foot shift or a left foot shift, or coupled with a weight shift, and then the reverse step through. you watch any video out there of anybody doing a form or a set, and you'll see that, and I'll put money on it. Okay, so that is something that we're practicing. The general populace practices on a regular basis, and yeah, then they drop into that perfect great stance that everybody's talking about. Okay, and you can step back, you can settle, or you can drop, and there is a difference. Okay, and so if you're practicing one only over all of the others, then you're not giving yourself a full range or the full gamut of understanding and exercise in how to acquire or when to acquire or at what speed or what, all of those things to acquire a stance. And as well as timing with the blocks, the parries, the punches, the kicks, and so on and so forth.
Is there any kind of drills or suggestions you have to assist the practitioner in to be able to overcome that or to perfect that?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I do to my students, and I say, he laughs. One of the things that I do to my students, and I say I do to my students, but one of the things that I teach them is, it's the world over. Everybody knows how to walk. Everybody knows how to crawl. Everybody knows how to run. Okay. By the time they get to a karate class, but as soon as they step into a karate class, they forget all of those things and they start doing something that in their mind, in their vision, is karate, right? And we're talking about a beginner level. And what happens is that carries through unless they make a conscious effort to change it and or have been corrected, it carries through. So one of the things that I talk to my students about and I make them work on is moving yourself with the correct foot, making the weight shift with the proper foot, okay? Not shifting your weight and then dragging your foot back to a reverse step through or to a back crossover. But if you're doing a reverse step through, that front foot should be pushing you backwards, not dragging, not the hips rotating and then the weight shifting and then the foot dragging back. Now, it sounds really simple and really stupid, but I challenge any of you to go do that and videotape yourself doing short form 1, okay, and watch what happens with your feet as you go through that form.
I find a common mistake. Well, let's talk about that. Common mistakes that we see. This is obviously one that you're bringing attention to. The other thing that I always find is we're supposed to be a mirror image of ourselves in the execution of the form. In other words, if you're 6 foot, you should be executing all the techniques against somebody 6 foot and mirror image of you. So your kicks are right to the same height of the knees or the groin. Your strikes are in the eyes, your eye height and whatnot. However, there's a common practice I'm seeing that not happening. And the other thing I always see, which I'll open this up for discussion, is I find the head movement bounces like a cork in the bathtub, constantly doing this business, up and down and dropping, poke the guy that's 6'5", kick the guy that's 3'6". Okay, so the point is that's wrong. It was beaten into me. That was wrong. So I worked on that, and that really delves what you're talking about, Todd, about footwork, and what you're talking about, Derek, with foundation, and what you're talking about, Jason, with repetition. Okay, so let's address that. Why is that so common? And I'll go back to you, Todd, and then I'm going to switch it around.
So let me ask you something. Why is that head bobbing so wrong? I'm just curious.
In my estimation, is improper training, learning, and not having the foundation right. But I'll defer to Zach Carter. Zach, what is your thoughts?
But hold on. But what? Okay, so my point was, it was a kind of a rhetorical question. If we look at, and this is where the universal pattern, the study of the dimensional zones theories come in, is that if you look at a person, we're 3-dimensional, okay? 2 of those dimensions are the most visible in combat. Any change or modification or adjustment in 2 of those zones or 2 of those dimensions, what are they? Height and width. Depth is the hardest thing to detect in combat. Okay, we bring in the spatial spatial distortion, yada yada yada. So when something moves in depth without a change in height or width, it's now far more difficult to detect its movement or motion. But when you change your height any amount or your width any amount, the change is horribly obvious. Okay, because the brain only has to process a little tiny bit to see that change. Whereas depth, you need both eyes, you have to adjust. It takes a much greater amount of concentration and focus and understanding and processing in the little computer there to pick up the change in depth, if it's done without a change in width and height.
Jason, your thoughts?
I believe that people or students relax too much in between the transitions of from stance to stance, movement to movement. That's why you see the head bobbing up. I too came up saying, knowing that that was incorrect and that was wrong, because you float up, then you drop down. You float back up and drop back down. And I think Mr. Wedlake said it the best. It was like dropping a ceiling down on top of your head when you're in a neutral bow, and you stay there with the complete correct height all the way through to the end, to the horse, until you come back to your attention stance. That's what I like to try to portray to the students that I have about the ceiling being lowered, to try to stay constantly at that height level. All too often, I competed in a tournament last year for the first time in many years. And there was a gentleman quite higher ranked than me that I noticed that's what he did throughout his entire form. Every movement between one to the next was up and down, up and down, up and down. And it looked sloppy, and it looked really bad, terrible at best, as far as that goes. But I do believe that I would attribute it to people just relaxing too much between the transitions of the stances.
Yeah, well, we don't have any instant feedback. I mean, if you do something wrong in self-defense, I would say it's freestyle. Let's go freestyle.
Right.
You do something incorrect, there's instant feedback. You got your face
Oh,
punched.
yeah, absolutely.
With forms, there isn't any. Women go to finishing school and they learn how to walk properly. So they put a book on their head, or they sit in a chair with a book on their head. Why? To keep their balance, to keep their neck erect, and to make sure that they're consistent on their walk, not doing this. Okay.
Sure.
I'm going to refer to Zach Carter on that now. Zach, let's talk about, we'll switch to the other stances. For example, in 5, Kenpo 5, what do we see there all the time?
We definitely see a lot of bobbing up and down, but what drives me crazy about this, because it was hammered into my head by all my instructors, is that they're not getting in their proper stance, like in a wide kneel, for say, or a forward bow. You see them cheating with their stances so much, and it just drives me nuts. And long form 5 is all takedowns. That's one of the main theme of that form. And people are hitting the groin shot, let's per se, but it's up chest level. And there's no way that that's happening. And it drives me nuts, But one of the other things that short form 1, through all the forms, is timing. And we haven't talked about that, and how proper body mechanics and everything also involves timing, with your depth, height, and width, and a very important aspect.
Derek, how do you, when you're teaching, say form 1, short form 1, how do you assist the students so that they'll understand that there's a lot going on, and though it appears to be very simple?
I mean, it's proper basics. I mean, nobody teaches a basics class anymore. Everybody wants to come in and they sign up for a program, but basics. You can remember being there, even with your eyes closed. Somebody says, step through, boom, you do it. And it's not until we actually hit the forms that instead of just linear moving in one direction, start breaking off into our clock principles and doing some other things. Without a proper basics and foundation, and really, really practicing some of these almost to the beat of Tai Chi, to make sure that every little movement is meticulous. Now, videotape yourself, watch it. Back then, if you were lucky enough to have mirrors, you could watch yourself. But with short one especially, you should be able to close your eyes with a piece of tape on the floor, go through just the footwork or the movement or the form, and return back to the exact same place that you started it. And if you have the correct basics, don't have any ailments or anything that are pulling in certain directions, if you practice your basics enough and your transitions correctly, I promise you, you'll end up right where you left off.
So let's go to Dennis Canasser. Dennis, define some of the basics. Define the proper stances that we should see in short form one.
Man, you put me on the spot here with Master Durgan there. I mean, I got to have my dictionary available so I can check what he's saying. Anyway, but going along with what
Todd.
oh, I love Todd. I love Todd. He's always fun to blast with. You know, the thing is, he's absolutely correct. You know, the thing about bobbing up and down, Mr. Parker called deviating vertical point of origin. So, you know, you're bobbing up and down, you're going up, then you're coming back down. So you're violating point of origin on a vertical plane. You know, and what that does, as Todd says, is, you know, when you're moving correctly and smoothly and explosively, you can't be bobbing up and down. You're taking too much time. You're going up, you're going down. Not to mention being a visual, obvious telegraph, you know, that you're going up and down. I mean, you know, somebody that's a good fighter when you're fighting, if they bob up and down like that, that's when you take advantage of them. When they're going up, they can't move because they're too high, you know, so they're already up in the air. So that's when you can launch an attack when you, or if you are, you know, analytical. And I know sometimes I get over analytical, you know, myself, you know, but going with what Todd said, you know, when you look at the outer rim and you look at the universal pattern and you look at the patterns, you look at the footwork, you know, the footwork is based upon height, width, and depth. And like he says, depth is the most disguised. Width and height are the most obvious visual pickups. Okay. And the thing is, when you move backwards too, a lot of times people will start turning their shoulders wide. So when they get halfway through the transition, their body is totally, you know, available for attack because their width zone is too wide. You know, their shoulders are too wide. You got to keep your shoulders narrow. Your feet are the ones that step back. Your foot's the one that steps back in transition. And then when you get back there to your base point, that's when you turn, and then you get maximum body rotation, as well as, of course, making your arm rotate as well. And you're keeping yourself within the outer rim without bobbing up and down vertically, you know, etc. And you can launch these attacks with, you know, your arms are still cocked. They're not half rotated all the way around, you know, which, and we did mention it, you know, timing. And timing then, you know, is important. And we don't talk too much about timing, or for the most part, I don't see a lot of people talk too much about timing. You know, if you look at the equation formula, in which I have in the orange belt, you know, in there's dimensions, height, width, and depth that you must follow, and there's also timing and target selections. And so, you know, these are all things, and of course, short form one, long one, short two, long two. These are things that are meant to develop these basics if they're done correctly. And a lot of times we are satisfied with just doing the basic form. You can go on the internet and look at the absolute worst short form one out there. I mean, the worst short form one out there, and you can still tell the short one. You know, but it doesn't mean it's correct. Everything is wrong with it, but you can still tell it's short form one. And a lot of people are satisfied with being able to just perform the basic sequential orders of this thing without looking at the technical aspects of it, which ultimately give you more power, more quickness, more speed, more continuity, and so on and so forth. I mean, I have to defer to Todd for all the vernacular here, because he's ahead of me on that. But you know, a lot of that stuff is really important. Todd?
Okay, well, I'm not sure how anybody has a conversation about basics and forms and sets without talking about timing. But well pointed out. It's obvious when you see a lot of things happening that timing is not part of the conversation. I have an acronym that I use. It's called TAPS. It goes TAPS. A lot of people have different ones. I know Senior Grandmaster Chuck Sullivan has ASP for accuracy, power, speed, or I'm not sure what he uses it, but mine is timing. And what it does for me and for my students is it puts the proper relevance of each individual element in my mind. Now remember, this is just me in my backyard. Timing is one of the most important elements. You can't have accuracy without timing. You can't have power without proper timing and accuracy, and you can't have speed. Well, okay, speed is arguable because you need to have speed for power. That's kind of but timing is the first and most important element when executing. And when we talk about forms and stances and basics and working our timing, we should talk about stance set one. It's a little credited set that it can make a world of difference for any beginning student. I believe I teach it at Orange Belt, and their stances and their transitions and their basic footwork. And to go with what Derek says, my class starts with 10 to 15 minutes of basics. Every class. You ask any one of my students, they'll tell you what the first thing we do: footwork, footwork, footwork. 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes of footwork. Step through, reverse step through, front crossovers, back crossovers, reverse covers, et cetera, et cetera. And then we go through basic kicks. Sometimes it's on a bag, sometimes it's with a partner, sometimes it's in the air. And then we go through sets or punches, and then we move into interactive hoobud, focus pads. Anyway, point is timing. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you talk about the feet moving and the body not moving first. And that's one of the most common things you see is people, when they do the reverse step through, let's take that second move in short form one, the first reverse step through after you drop back in your right inward block, that first reverse step through, you see people, they'll go from their neutral bow, they'll turn wide, then they'll draw their foot back, and then they'll step, and then they'll turn in and they'll execute their block. And yeah, that has an element of timing that is somewhat proper. But what happens, and if we really want to look at timing in the minutia of timing, okay, when all of those things move, they are changing your dimension. And if you move those things in a proper sequence and follow some level of kinesiology and kinesthetics, then you start to incrementally improve your power through proper application of timing.
Yeah,
And
I might add, one thing we have to remember, and I think this is key, is Kenpo is a continual process of renewal. And a lot of people learn short form one and that's it. They don't practice it. They know how to do it and they move on. They don't look at any of the stuff we're talking about. And that's the same thing with many forms. I see people doing the 4, the 6, and the movements are, people doing the 6 and they do stand-up moves in the middle of it, like they have a corn cob, put someplace it's not supposed to be, and it just looks dumb as doorknob. It's like, why are you doing this? This is not good Kenpo motion or movement if we're technically looking at this like we should be at, and these guys are wearing, 5th and above, 6 and 7s are doing this. And I'm going, I don't get it. The hand movements are incorrect. They're not going to the proper width. We haven't been talking much about hands, but, feet are obviously the most important because that's what gears and drives the whole body. Without proper footwork and height and width of those, everything else is secondary. Nothing's going to work. Like Todd says, we're not going to develop proper timing, and power, because we're not getting the proper rotation. We're not getting the proper torque. We're not getting, we're telegraphing our moves, et cetera, et cetera. So we can pick apart a lot of stuff. And we have to continually remember that we are a continual process of renewal. Anybody who thinks they know short form one in their 5th degree, yeah, it, but are you really working it? You know, and are you really looking at bettering it? Or are you satisfied with, you know, just, you know, whatever level that you feel you're doing or whatever? And of course, that's where, you know, one of the proper, you know, things that you know, is a problem today in my eyesight is instruction. We have basically poor instruction. Situations like what we're in here is great to get. I wish we had more people that would interact, because what we need is more people sharing with each other and giving each other ideas, and you know, creating questions, and you know, and creating inspirations and things like that. And to me, that's really important, because that's how we actually grow. I've had several talks with several of you, Jason, with Zach, with Todd. I love talking with Todd, Paul Casey. You know, I haven't talked with Shane much. I don't know you, sir. You know, one day maybe. And Derek and I have not talked to great length, but it's really fun when you start sharing with people that are experienced, and that's where we learn. Constant or continual process of renewal, and that means renewal of what? Of footwork, of basics, of stances, you know, and then we can get into the hands and the finger techniques and some of that kind of stuff. But really, the stances and the footwork is number one in Mr. Parker's eyes. He said, oftentimes before you have to do anything else, you got to be able to move. And when you can't move properly and quickly with proper effect, and that gets into what Todd really works a lot on, and he's probably the best person in the world that I know of that does it, and that's on the universal pattern and on dimensions, you know, and on levers and things like that. And they're really key movements, and Todd's one of the best at those, and they all help us develop power and strength and being basically effective.
I had a conversation with Dave Hebler. Dave Hebler and I talked at great length about the beginning of Kenpo in the early years. And he told me, Paul, the system is premised off of music. Mr. Parker was very musical. So he could break it up in music, keep it simple, because that's my background. Music's broken down into timing of notes. So you have, you'll have a measure, 4 measures, and the beats end on the quarter note, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then if you have it, instead of just on the quarter note, you have the 8s. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, okay? And then you have 16, etc. So you can start playing around with the timing facet of Kenpo and change it around and make a particular technique much different than it was originally created. Same thing with a form. Frank Trejo was wonderful with that. For a guy that never had any formal training in music or in dance, he had great timing. He had great rhythm. He knew exactly how to address a form and to present it in a way that kept the viewer mesmerized. So, Jason, how do you keep your timing to work efficiently with your basics in your forms?
Well, that's a good question. That's actually a pretty loaded question, I would say.
We're ready for the answer.
I'm not sure. That's kind of took me by surprise there. I'm not even sure how to answer that, to be honest with you.
He loves to do that, by the way.
I see that.
I've been hanging out with Todd and Dennis. So there.
I guess so. You caught me by surprise. I guess not that I'm at a loss for words at the moment, but you just you kind of got me there.
Derek Hibben, answer the question.
Practice. Practice, practice, practice. It's like the rule of 10,000. You know what I mean? You can learn how to do something wrong 9,999 times, but you get it right just once and figure out the proper mechanics and timing of it all. You really have to analyze yourself. You have to be willing to take input. I think that's one of the hardest things for a lot of people nowadays is constructive criticism, is being humble enough to, no matter the rank, just if somebody notices something, you may not even notice it or feel it, but practice, practice, practice. And from my background, especially doing fencing, really, really, really helped my timing and really, really, really helped my footwork. So much so that like I couldn't live it down for a long, long time. But having a background in music, a background in dance, my mother was a dance teacher. My father was not only knife maker Gil Hibben, but also, a lot of you don't know, very, very well trained in Ed Parker's American Kenpo. And I mean,
and rhythm bone.
Yeah, and rhythm bones. But I mean, like, it's just all of the above was just drilled into me as a kid growing up. Like, this is how you move. This is what you do. And to me, it became like a second language to where I was so used to doing it. Like, even after injury, I can tell when and if I make an incorrect move, even if it's a stutter step. I can feel my foot slightly up. Am I in a neutral? No. Am I in a, like, no. My right foot is slightly pressured up because I have a fractured foot. I can tell the difference. And a big part of that is not only training and practice, but it's muscle memory, position recognition, all of the things that we teach and what we do come down to those through basics and timing. And to me, especially the way that it was presented and taught to me, the way that I try to present it and teach it to others and or my students have been, you know, this is the first time, other than doing some basics, you're being asked to put your hands and your feet together and move simultaneously in a sequence. It's the first time you're being asked to do it. And that's a lot to put on somebody that doesn't quite grasp and understand all of these, even if their basics are good, understand all these things. And unless they hammer it and practice it, it's like the old saying, you know, if you're right-handed, you hit the bag 100 times with your right, you hit it 200 with your left to get both sides strong and to be able to maneuver properly. And to me, it's just been so ingrained and so, I mean, my legs used to get just hammered, you guys. But it's what really, really knocked it into me, and really videotaping and watching yourself. And I did have the pleasure of having floor to ceiling mirrors and where I taught out of that. It was real easy to see. You can even use a laser, shoot it across where your head should be, and just have one of the kids or somebody point out, moved, you bobbed, moved. It becomes a game and they love it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. My father used to go to Toastmasters, and every time you would use an or a ah or incorrect, there'd be a little bell, bing, 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 you know, things like that. And it's funny in music, if the drummer's just going with the click, one, two, and he's not accenting any sound, we really don't know where we're at unless he starts to count. Mr. Parker says it's the sophistication and the punctuation of rhythm. Punctuation of rhythm. So if you look at certain songs when they do a pickup on the 3-4-1, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and they're in there. Okay, now a lot of time in click tracks and whatnot, we remove that in the editing. But live, you'll hear him go he'll go 1, 2, click, click, bam. And the reason we do that is so we all know exactly where we're coming in, so that we can hit the downbeat. It's important to remember that because Parker's background was in music. And so he would understand that the synchronization of making sure that all this flowed at one time. Correct, Todd? Why don't you pick it up from there? I'm giving you a beat.
What was the exact question again that you started with on this?
I forgot now. Make up a new one for us, Todd.
Yeah. So timing and rhythm. It's also something that I've seen that happens is that people, and everybody's going to nod and exasperate themselves with this, people have a tendency to move through self-defense techniques, for example, at a far greater speed and or rhythm than the opponent would ever have a chance to react to. Okay, and they also have a tendency to move so fast that they're not able to properly execute their basics, right? So it ends up being this waving, slapping.
Yeah, exactly.
What's that?
Exactly. I think Derek could quote Mr. Planis on that one. Are you hitting? Are you touching?
Yeah, yeah, and so that brings about this in forms. That brings about this waving, moving thing that isn't really adhering to any type of sensible application, whether it's practice or not. I mean, you watch some of the even a very well executed Tai Chi form has proper timing. It has the execution and the rhythm keeps you in tune with the overall performance or presentation of the form. And so that is the song, and the beats change in the middle and around, but and yes, practice is, there's no way you can get around it. But one of the things that happens, especially nowadays with commercial studios, or more frequently with commercial studios, is that there's less monitoring from the instructor or the teacher to the student, so they're not helped with any understanding of rhythm, timing. I know Mr. Rainey, he was great about that. I mean, and that guy, he has a great broken rhythm, and he'll use his timing. I remember one time I was a brown belt, and everything, and we were in rhythm, we were kind of in sync, we're freestyling, and it was going, it was moving, and man, I was feeling pretty good, and I thought, I'm gonna get this guy, right? Yeah, no, I moved in with a blitz back knuckle, and before I even got there, and this goes back to something else, so before I got there, he did a step back spinning roundhouse kick, kicked me in the ribs, set me back about 3 feet, knocked the wind out of me, popped 3 of my ribs out over my heart, and really kind of ruined my day. But so that goes back to something else I was talking about with regard to timing and the dimensional zones, et cetera, et cetera. So rhythm.
It's funny you say that, because we adapt when it comes to the freestyle. However, when it comes to the forms, that's the question. What is the correct speed to execute that form so that the person viewing it can actually see? I can actually see Todd Durgan poking his eye or double parrying, or I can actually see the strikes from the kicks and what is the speed that we need to have where it's effective but not too fast, where it
yeah, but that's an individual thing, because every individual at every belt level has a different speed that they're going to execute at, and that's also something that has to be passed on and pointed out from the teacher or instructor to the student, to say, hey, look, you're moving so fast, you're not executing your basics properly. You're not hitting your neutral bow. You're not hitting your transitional cat stance. I'm not seeing these things. You're not hitting targets. Are you fighting Goliath, or are you fighting Minnie Mouse? And pay attention to who you're fighting. I agree with the mirror image thing. You should be fighting somebody your own size. I had a guy in my class, he's 6'5". Okay. There's almost nobody his size walking around in the world. And he's going through, I forget, it was delayed sword. And he's dropping his hand sword down to his waist. And I said, well, who are you hitting? Oh, well, I didn't. Now, mind you, he's brand new, but I said, you need to think of yourself doing a technique on you, right? So anyway, back to the timing thing. Yeah, what is the proper speed? That is something that has to be regulated by the capacity to execute the basics properly and to hit the
we have a
target.
misunderstanding or misconception that speed means better.
Oh, largely in the Kenpo world. Largely.
Jason, what are your thoughts on that?
Real quick, one of Dave Hebler's favorite things to say is Kenpo is notorious. We're notorious for our speed, which is one of our greatest assets and one of our worst assets.
Jason, thoughts?
I'm not a speed guy. I'm not a speed guy, so I don't get caught up into the world of speed that you see all over the internet, where somebody would be hitting their training partner in class 25 times. I don't fall prey to that. I can't do that. That's just not my body style or structure or anything like that. So that doesn't actually end up in my class all that much.
What about you, Shane? You're working with Jason, and Shane, you're sitting there. How do you know that you're performing you're executing the form techniques in the form, but you're not missing your points. You're not completing each of your sentences.
Well, here's what I can say is that the slower I move through the forms, the more mistakes I notice I make. I can tell, like when I do the forms super slow, like Tai Chi slow, that's when I notice my biggest mistakes, because my body it doesn't know how to move that way. So I think for me personally, the slower I do the forms, I think the more that I'm going to get out of them for my muscles. My muscles are going to understand what's going on and when, because the body will naturally fall into place properly when you develop, when you do things that slow, you notice those things. It's the way it is for me anyways.
Zach, we've worked with your forms many times.
Oh, yes.
What do we focus on?
Rhythm, for one. Actually, a lot of the things that you're talking about, proper execution and timing of doing the moves, and stances, and basics, and more basics. And as Mr. Trejo used to humble me, we would do long 4, and then the next thing you know, we'd be right back to short 1 again, and getting humbled, and working the basics and the timing of all those moves. And also, we haven't talked about it a lot today, but the use of the universal pattern within the forms and those movements. And I'm sure Mr. Durgan could talk a lot more in depth about that, but that was another thing that was brought up quite a bit.
We'll delve in that in a moment. I think it was touched on earlier, the transitional periods, transitional movements between each of the techniques in the form as they're set. I think a lot of it is sort of like anticipating your next move, but don't forget where you're at when you're doing the technique. If, for example, the first technique in the form that you do, and then you're thinking the next you don't wait till you get to the next technique. Just, I better do that, because that's where the footwork issue that Todd's talking about, that's about where the bouncing of the head comes up. Oh yeah, because there's a bit of a confusion, as Derek was saying. So Dennis, how do we have the vision to execute the form in its entirety without violating those principles?
Getting back to the equation formula, one of the areas that we're talking about is regulation. And you got to regulate speed, force, or speed and force. And that's part of the regulation, just that we're talking about. That, and again, you find that in the equation formula, which is one of my keys that I make all my guys memorize. The next thing is, talking like what Shane said, I agree with him totally. I have several different ways that I train forms. I've talked to Jason about this, numerous times. One is our regular speed that you would consider your normal speed that you do the form for tournaments or for testing or, whatever. The next thing is another method is doing it extremely slow, Tai Chi slow, maybe even slower than Tai Chi. and watch every specific angle and poke and print, you know, and punch and kick and whatever, anything you're doing, make sure it's exactly on target. And you're doing it so slow that you don't have to worry about flexibility. You don't have to worry about speed. You don't have to worry about balance because you're doing it so slow. How can you possibly get it wrong unless you just don't, you haven't been
Easy.
taught well?
I think the balance question is there because we're in a hurry in the previous application. As we slow it down, we're realizing we need, one thing we haven't talked about is breathing. We should talk about that. Breathing, which nobody talks about. If you regulate your breath and you clear your mind as you're executing the form, you will understand, you will see yourself. It's sort of the point of view. Parker talked about my view, Dennis's view, and Derek's view. However, when you're by yourself, you should do all of that. I should see my view, I should see the person in front of his view, and I should see somewhere else those other view, which delves into what Todd talks about. I don't have his universal. This is mine, little ball, but you picture yourself in the ball and you're visualizing everything so that you don't crack like Humpty Dumpty. Okay. So that's a thought. And, Parker says here when he talks about in his book in volume 1, Infinite Insights, he talks about foot maneuvers. And, when I came out of Pasadena, it was literally beat into me. Now I can't speak for anybody else, but it was beaten into me about foot maneuvers. And he says requires coordination with movements of the upper body. So you got to have both. It's not like 1 and 2. Otherwise you become like driving down the street with one flat tire. Boom, 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 boom. It does. You just know it's not right. Derek mentions his foot. He has a crack in there. So he can feel it if it's not exactly right. And so since the timing in both the upper and lower body needs complete synchronization, foot maneuvers demand more time and therefore list further down the line of priorities. They're put down there. But you know what, folks? That goes back to our, 8 considerations. You look at your, environmental awareness. You got to understand, well, what the heck? We practice on a flat surface. It's usually even. It's not wet. We're working it through. However, by training that way, at least we have the sense of where we're at. Then we get into a situation where we're out in the street and something pops up and you go, oh my God, what do we do? So what do we do, Todd? How do we address that so that we have that complete synchronization? We move fluidly through the movement. What's that?
Well, so you have to start, you have to, it's a progressive build. Now we're talking about a beginning student is what I'm talking about. I don't know what anybody else is talking about, but it's got to be a progressive build, right? You can't throw the dictionary at a kindergartner and say, here's all your words for the year. It's just not going to work. So, we have to progressively build that. And, Mr. Parker put the system together and it does that. Stance set, I think, where is stance set at in the traditional system there, Dennis? It's in orange or purple?
I think it's in, I have it in blue.
Okay.
It's
Anyway,
way down there, purple or blue.
So, but to be fair, when he says that in Infinite Insights, one of the things that we have to consider when we're looking at what he's saying is that, a person is going to be able to more readily defend themselves if they have a few hand movements, right? They're going to be able to pick those up quicker and so let's work on those first, and then we'll get to the foot maneuvers and the the real meat stuff where we're going to enable them to increase their power capacity and their timing and all of those things, after they're able to do a block, do a punch, do an eye strike. So how do we get to a place where we're more fluid and we're more our timing and our everything is better? And that Derek was talking about and Shane was talking about. As if we move through, and I believe Mr. Knatzer was also talking about, if we move through these things, and not just your forms, not just your sets, but your techniques as well. work them at different speeds. Also, one of the most valuable things that I've ever had as a teaching or as a learning aid is video. Okay. Now, I don't watch video from years ago that I have of myself. That's archived and buried somewhere in a capsule in the backyard. But I go, I go more recently and I look at video, and because, it was asked, how do we progressively learn? Or what do we do? The fifth degrees, they get short form 1 and they have it, and there you go. Well, I always ask myself, I say, well, okay, now I think I have this. What am I missing with everything? Anything, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how long I've had. I've had delayed sword for who knows how long, how many years, short form 1. I always go back and I ask myself, what am I missing? The opportunity that we have as teachers is to watch our students, and they become our compass as to what are we missing, if we're honest with ourselves. And we look at a student and we say, okay, well, I thought I taught them this form properly, or I gave them this information, but it's clearly missing. I go back and I work it. So I know I totally sidestepped your question there, Mr. Casey, but that's all I got.
No
Because
worries.
I forgot your question.
It's funny that you say that. I'm sorry.
I'd like to add, again, along with Todd, this is a continual process of renewal. You need to dig up those time capsules and look at yourself and see how far you've accomplished, what you've accomplished. But here's what he said. One thing that's interesting is as we teach, as Todd was talking about, as we teach, we are monitoring that student, not necessarily in video, but in our eyes and our mind and how we teach them. And we're making continual adjustments to them normally because they've got a real instructor in front of them at the lower ranks. Unfortunately, at the upper ranks, we don't have typically that instructor hanging over us as much as we had when we were, in brown and under, particularly in yellow, orange, and purple. By the way, it's a purple belt that I have the stance set in there, and it could very well be easily put on in yellow or orange, really. But we got to remember, it's a continual process, as Todd was talking about, of renewal, and we don't have anybody working ourselves, and that's a problem that I see today as the instruction. Instructors need to have continual pride, and that's why I think these kind of things are really good, because it brings up a lot of points that we need to do. And it would be nice if we could all get together in a class and I could evaluate, say, Jason, and then Todd could evaluate me, and we could all learn from that without, and by the way, if we ever have a class like that, here's what happens. You throw all your belts out the window and either wear no belts or wear plain belts, and that way nobody looks, oh, wow, look at that guy with all that red on there. Man, I can't say anything about him because he's like 10 degrees ahead of me or some ridiculous thing. No, you got to throw that stuff out the window, and you got to remember we're all working with each other, and we should throw our egos out the window and go, okay, well, let me see what Jason has to say about me. What is he noticing about me that I can use let's look at these things constructively and positively versus attacks on ourselves. You know what I mean? Let's try to view it like a beginning student. We need to go back to being a beginning mind at that point and be able to take constructive, now I'm saying constructive, not destructive, criticism from anybody, from that matter. At least
that can happen in this setting if Paul brings in video of submitted video.
Yo. Okay,
hey, I've got some out there. Go ahead.
Oh my God.
Well, I got a person doing the 6 that no, never mind. Forget that.
Wasn't me.
Okay.
What about
the funny thing is, going back way back when I first came up in the music business, the hardest thing for me was to watch myself in a performance or to listen to myself in a recording studio. The best thing I ever did was do that. And now you have to, like you were saying, set aside the ego. Remember that the reflection that you're going to see is the true self that it's videotaping. And I think Derek will be on point on this one. The practice. If you continuously practice it wrong, you'll continuously perform it wrong. If you have the chance like these educational video series tapes can do. They can help us to improve. And the most important thing is take off your belt. Forget about what you're ranked. That's just a recognition of accomplishments and contributions.
Lay it on the floor to check your
yourself.
stances.
I'm sorry. Say it again.
You said take off your belts. I said lay it on your floor to check your stances.
You know,
Done that before.
I do this all the time with Zach and the other students. And
Mr. Casey, what about continuity within the form? I know we've talked about this. I know Frank and Louis talked about this a lot with me. Is a commonality that you see a lot nowadays is someone starts out the 4 like thundering crazy, and then the form just slows down as they go. There's no continuity and speed. And one of the things always hammered into me by you and Frank and everybody I've ever talked to is have that constant speed throughout the form.
I think
once again, I go back to the equation formula: speed, force, speed, and force. How you apply that force, you know, whether it be a single move, you know, or whether it be an explosive move. And then we get into timing, like Mr. Casey's saying, you know, instead of quarter beat timing, we got 16th beat or 8th beat. And the thing is, in reality, we need to mix all those up. The song that we sing on the street is an explosion of several different beats. It's not a constant song.
Monotone.
Right, exactly.
Well, you'll find that. You can tell when you've ever had a conversation with somebody and they just, it doesn't change. And you go, oh my God, I'm hearing crickets. I'm hearing crickets. And the point is that if, you know, the way, this goes back to some basic things, folks. As we get older, we need to work on our conditioning. So hit the treadmill, eat a little less of the sugar, work out so that you have the stamina. And then remember, when you set your, now Jason might, you know, have it at a certain tempo that he's worked up to, but I guarantee that the end of his form, the tempo there matches the front of his form. So he doesn't come out like gangbusters and then he's huffing and puffing and just barely getting across the finish line. And that also pertains to the opening salutation and the closing salutation. By the way, this shirt I'm wearing, I wore this specifically for today. This is, I think, 81, early 80s, and it was from the IKC, and it's Mr. Parker doing the salutation. But the point is that it should be consistent. When you walk out on that mat, your mindset is there. You know exactly what you're going to do. And as soon as you do the salutation to the end salutation, it is consistent. The tempo should be the same. If I'm wrong, please let me spray somebody.
I think that one of the mistakes that we make, and I know I'm guilty of this in years past, is that we practice the form. We do practice a form sometimes in that monotone mindset to get through the form, to practice it. But there's a difference between practicing the form and performing the form. Those are two different things. And so when we get to the point where we have the form, now we've practiced it a bunch, and I say have in jest, mostly after the conversation today, where we have the form, now we need to go back, and it cannot be monotone. It has to have life, and each individual technique and each individual transition has to have its own life. But we talk about continuity, and then we have to talk about symmetry of motion. So if I'm doing 4 and I do protecting fans on one side, boom, boom, and I transition and I go to the other side, it better be the same height, depth, and width and speed as the first side, okay? How do I get to that? Well, the way I get to that is I have to import, for every technique and for every transition, I have to import feeling. I have to emote what that means to me each individual time that I do it. And if I'm not transferring that emotion forward or presenting that emotion, then it's just motion. And it has and then it becomes monotone. And I see Dennis biting over there going, let me talk, let me talk.
Emotional content, not anger.
Well, it's, you know, back to the beginning of this discussion, the mirror image. What you do on the right side, you're supposed to do exactly on the left side. However, consistently in Kenpo, when it comes to first, the biggest ones I always see mistakes are kicks. I'm sorry, we're really not really a kicking system, but I think you can be able to kick somebody at the same level below the waist on each side. It's, I just don't get that one. Please help me. And the other thing is the wounded wing. If there's a hand movement on one side, make it equal on the other. Don't look like you got your arm in a sling, or leave it.
Mr. Rainey used to call that, Mr. Rainey called that, not dead space, dead, oh, come on. Anyway, he would call it was basically a dead hand. Dead hand, that's what we call it. He'd call it a dead hand or a dead limb. He'd say, look, you have to time this. And so that's where, and so this is one of the mistakes people make too, that coincides with that. You know, people talk about economy of motion and big circles lead to big trouble. And that's true in certain instances and certain circumstances. But if we think about how are we going to time one weapon with another weapon, and they're both moving or traveling at different distances from the nucleus. Okay, so here's where we have orbital adjustments and orbital movement. Okay, we have two weapons traveling at different distances or lengths and different paths from the nucleus of the body. Okay, one is going to have to travel either slower or faster than the other, or one's going to have to travel on a longer path or path or line than the other in order for them to syncopate at the end of that motion or to be synchronized.
Isn't that go back to our timing with this sophistication?
Absolutely.
Because you think about it, you were saying protecting fans, okay? All right. And you look at the strikes, you know, they're you know, they're different things working. It's like the clock. There's a lot, you know, that little clock, as Dennis would say, the clockmaker versus the iron maker. You gotta be able to sync these things in the right way. It's difficult if you can't see it, because you won't understand you're doing it wrong. Therefore, an extra pair of eyes through the use of a video, if you're lucky. And we all have cell phones these days, so stick your cell phone over in the corner, or call up Derek Hibben and let him videotape you. And then you're going to pay him even 3 times as much money not to put it out on YouTube. Or, I mean, there's times I've been with Zach and we have filmed stuff and we promise you that this ain't going anywhere, dude. We'll look at it and go, oh my God. And you really see your mistakes, but you need that. But it really gets down to a really good instructor, a good teacher. So help us define that, Dennis. How do we set aside that and get the right person qualified to help us?
Well, you know, I'm looking at the group here, and we have far less on this, probably because it was advertised as forms. And note how a lot of people shy away from forms. They don't want to do forms.
Why?
You know, so well, either because they were trained incorrectly and they weren't emphasized the importance of these things in training, or they just don't like them. They would rather spar. That's their love is sparring or doing technique lines or something, some other facet of our art. You know, we're a multifaceted diamond, and so consequently, a lot of times people pick and choose what they want versus what they need. You know, and so there's a difference there. But
Yeah, but
I'd
are
like
we
to,
sparring when we do our katas?
well, indirectly yes, but the thing is, you never lose when you do a form. You know, you always win. You could do a horrible form, but you always win. In sparring, that ain't the case. You know, because now you got an actual opponent there that can find things and possibly, you know, like I'm glad I never worked out with Rainey because I like my ribs. You know,
Todd, I see Todd shaking his head. No, no, no. Am I wrong? You lose even when a kata, right, sir? Because what you're doing, Dennis, is you're practicing something wrong. Okay,
Well,
it's going to take you twice as long to correct that and fix it.
well, yeah, practice makes, Mr. Parker would say, practice makes permanent. You know, perfect practice, with the eye of a watchful instructor makes for improvement. I'm not sure we ever get to perfect, but it's a matter of improving ourselves all the time. And like Shane said, I'm kind of going back to what Shane said. One thing I teach is training forms and techniques extremely slow, so you can watch every increment of your movement very slow. So you make sure and get the right angle, the elbows dropped, the hand is closed or open depending on what you're doing, etc. Another form of that is doing it extremely powerful. So you're going to lose some form to some degree, but you're going to do stuff with power, with penetration. And penetration is another thing that is often missed with a lot of things. And I'll use the term, the technique 5 swords. You do the first block, and then when you do the chop, you're doing this slicing chop. And I have dropped people, Bob White watched me do it at his school, where I hit these guys with a chop, and I sliced it, but I penetrated with this thing, and they couldn't believe how hard they got hit by this slicing chop. And so the thing is, doing stuff extremely powerful, doing stuff, extremely slow, doing it normal, doing it extremely powerful. And then the last one that I do is doing it extremely fast, doing short form 1 fast. It'll take about 2 seconds. Now, do you have proper stances? No. Do you have proper footwork? No. But you're going totally from memory on block, 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 block. You're trying to get through all the block, just to see how quick your mind can evaluate 8 blocks and go through there. So you're doing extreme fast. I do that one the least of any of the others. But doing these things, and I think extremely slow, as Shane pointed out, I think he's right on with that. You get to watch all your mistakes because you're doing it so slow. You can see everything relatively clearly. There's no speed to cloud the mixture. There's no power to cloud the mixture. And every minute, and again, I'm with Todd to use his word. You're working at the form with minutia. So you're looking at your footwork, your foot. Where's your heel raising? Where's your foot sliding? Is your foot pushing? I mean, you're looking at every little micro detail of this form, and then eventually you start speeding it up. You start running the projector a little bit faster and a little bit faster till finally that becomes, with muscle memory, your speed. The question was, how do we do this? Well, training methods are how we do it. Todd has some great training methods. Shane came up with a training method, maybe by accident, maybe on purpose. I don't know. Either way, I take my hat off to him. He's got a really good point there, and there's reasons for doing it that way. I do it intentionally, and I came across these things years ago, and I found them for myself extremely valuable. And I find forms, by the way, extremely valuable to help me with my fighting, because the more I look at myself and I understand what I look like in the mirror and what I'm posing in the mirror and openings that I see, my opponent's got to be seeing those things as well, which gets back to book 1, page 1 of Infinite Insights, 3 points of view. I don't just look at my own point of view. I look at what my opponent's looking at and possibly what a bystander's looking at. And those things all collectively, Mr. Parker was so genius in putting out these journals for us to work on. Todd took the universal pattern and has taken it to the next level. He's taken levers.
3 questions before we get to the end of today, because this is just an introductory into forms and Kenpo's how we address it. Well, okay, our first question for everybody: are forms important to us?
Yes.
If so, why? That's an open question to anybody. Shane, you can jump anytime you want.
Timing, continuity, basics, timing, continuity, basics, timing, continuity. Let's try to go on.
You got it? Hit it. What about history? What about our heritage? What about our lineage? Is it important for us to know that?
Absolutely. I think you should know where your stuff comes from. If you don't, how do you know what it does?
Zach, your thoughts?
He pretty much said it. You have to know where you, I mean, years ago, you could tell who your instructor was if someone saw you doing a form. How many times years ago did we hear that? Ah, that's so-and-so student. I can see it. You know, so that's the history of that form. There's little nuances, like we know Mr. Trejo put the pause beats in there in his form 4 per se. So if you did it that way, people knew, ah, he must be a Trejo student. So, I mean, you know, history and everything's very important. I think a lot of people nowadays don't give that a lot of credence. I don't know why.
Jason, and then Derek, is it a dying part of our history?
I don't know necessarily about a dying part of history, but I've often told my students, especially within the last couple of years, that I actually think that the arts are actually becoming a dying breed. People like us that are actually teaching traditional arts are actually a dying breed. Everybody wants to get in the cage. They want to fight. They see anything that they want on YouTube or on TV anymore, and they believe that everything goes into the cage. They just want to fight in the cage. And they don't want to do any of the traditional arts anymore.
How many of those people actually go engage in an actual fight? How many of those people actually are confronted? How many
yeah,
have you been in the arts, sir?
How many have I? I've been training Kenpo for 26 years now. And
How many times have you engaged in a fight outside of school?
Probably next to none, I would imagine.
Okay, so do you think that just training to go into a cage is really realistic thought?
No, I'm going back to what people see in general. That's why we don't see the people practicing forms like they should, or even the traditional arts, because I actually train the forms myself more so than the techniques, because the forms, I believe, help augment our self-defense techniques to a whole new level. And I believe that the general population of people, whether it be the United States or even worldwide, I don't want to say worldwide necessarily, but the UFC has taken the world by storm. Dana White has done a fantastic job by mainstreaming the UFC, and it's like nothing to have people in our area just say that they want to just go train to go jump in the cage, but they're missing out on all the great things that we actually have, whether it be our art or another, which is the forms training.
Derek, your thoughts? How often do you train forms?
Used to be every single day. As I've gotten older, it's slacked back a little bit. Unless I know certain people are coming to visit, then I make sure that they're nice and tight.
I think he wins. You mean Santa Claus coming to visit you?
I mean, you never know who's going to show up on the doorstep. I mean, you should have seen the line that was going out the door to kick me in for my black belt. It was long and distinguished. I think today, especially with forms, a lot of people, when it comes to the people that are cross-training and training in other arts, everybody is so caught up in this instant gratification kind of time period that they understanding the how is easy. Nobody wants to dive into the why. That takes time, that takes dedication, that takes the real, you can tell, and my dad used to always tell me this, you know, there'll always be, out of a group of 10, there'll always be that one that you won't have to correct, that will train twice as hard, 5 times as harder as the guy next to him and next to him and next to him and next to him. And you start to notice these people, and I don't know how many of you can sit there and raise your hand and say, a yellow belt taught me this or an orange belt taught me that. It's because there's also some disconnect where unless we're able to have one-on-one dedicated time from our senior instructor to really, really give us perfect practice, a lot of times it's coming from somebody that we're putting faith and trust into to help teach and pass that along. So there has to be kind of that give and take and a little bit of counterbalance to give students enough momentum to start to teach because that's when you start to really process and learn some things, in my opinion, is once you teach it. But I think that the big no-no right now is everybody wants to do the how-to. They don't care about the why. They don't care about where we came from. And if you look at their forms, you can tell.
What's the biggest misconception regarding forms, guys? Misconception regarding forms.
But there's not a lot of usefulness in it. It's kind of
Exactly.
a waste of time.
Well, we've answered that with this last hour and a half, but the usefulness of it. But
Yeah.
Well,
but it is.
I think that's it's a misnomer, obviously. People like Jason said, people want to go to the UFC. Well, the thing that they'll learn real quick is they don't want to come and practice what we're teaching with forms and basics and footwork and doing the hard work, which is called, training. Well, they think it's hard with us. Go to the UFC and see what kind of training you're going to get there. If you ever want to get in the cage, you got to be pounding on tires. You got to be flipping tires. You got to be out there fighting in the cage, actually, and there's several black eyes and injuries that people don't even see, that are in there. All of a sudden, the training gets incredibly tougher because there's actual contact involved. We're able to teach a form, and there is no contact. You're a winner every time. You win every cage match that you can get into.
There's another.
So, I
There's
think
another element to that too, though, is that the cage fighting has rules. People don't realize that. They don't understand that. One of the things that happens, and I know this happens because I've heard some stories about it, is these guys will go train in the cage and they come back out and get in an actual fight and they exchange blows with somebody, but never thought to kick them in the groin or poke them in the eye or finish the fight. They're just exchanging blows with somebody like they're in the cage again. It's like, well, what happened to your Kenpo training? What happened to your martial arts training? The only difference between a martial artist and a street brawler is the finite understanding and scientific application of physics
And rules.
and in the street,
There are no rules.
anything goes, and those targets are in, whereas in the cage they're not.
Okay, let's address the last question before we break for today. I have to thank everybody for their participation. It's very enlightening. I hope that others get a chance to really see this and to discuss it more and see the significant importance of what forms are about. It's part of our lineage. It has great application. It addresses our basics, etc. There's a lot of the how part of why we do what we do. But let's ask the one big problem that I see. If you go to Ford or General Motors and they're building a vehicle, there's an assembly line. There's continuity on every product that goes down the assembly line to make sure that the right glass is in, the doors fit correctly, the proper paint is put on it, so that when it rolls off the assembly line, somebody finishes it off and making sure that that vehicle reflects exactly the way the manufacturer wanted it to be made. Now, mind you, that is an innate object. It is a product being manufactured. However, we are human beings, and we're subject to a few things. The question is, why don't we have better continuity between the practitioners across the board regarding our forms? And I will ask Mr. Knatzer to respond, and then I would like to see Mr. Durgan talk about it, and then we'll go through everybody else. So, Dennis, it's all you right now.
I think the biggest thing is just instruction. It's just we, the instructors, need to emphasize all the art. I make it my obligation to Mr. Parker to continue his art. Here it is, it'll be coming up 30 years here in December. And so it's my obligation to try to pass on as much as I can to whomever I can that wants to listen. And, we as instructors need to pass that on because it's survived this long and we've all done very well. It's a crime to not pass this on to our students. There are valuable things to learn here, and not everybody wants to get punched in the mouth, right off the bat. That can come later. I know I was a scaredy cat. I didn't want to get punched at all. And after I got into Kenpo, it became a lot of fun. I didn't mind getting punched at all. I got rid of that fear. This is Shark Week, so jumping in the water with 25 tiger sharks when we're on you is a little bit freaky to me. But the thing is, you get rid of that fear, and that's what it is. And we have a lot of fear about fighting and about getting hit and things. And we as instructors need to pass this on to them, and before they can absorb all the technical stuff that we have to offer, I think they need to get rid of that fear, and we need to train them and get them into the participation of the history and what we're doing and why this is a martial art, not a martial war. We are all artists, you know, and we're all warriors to say, with no war to go to. We have no wars to go to. And so we're training for this war that we may or may not ever get into. Well, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. And the thing is, it's a disgrace to let Mr. Parker's art die with all the work that he's put in, with all these areas. In fact, everything we've talked about today, he addresses someplace in his books, you know, that he put out, which are the Infinite Insights, you know, and he addresses these things, the 8 considerations, the equation formula, you know, stances, foot maneuvers, all this kind of stuff comes from him. And without him, you know, none of us would be talking about anything here. We'd be talking about Slurpees at Sonic or something, you know. And so I find it's a necessity. If you're gonna promote a student, a black belt does not mean you're a good fighter. How many good fighters are black belts? Not that many. Okay, it's the mark of a teacher. It's like being a PhD in college, you know, or a master's in college. You know, you don't necessarily know everything about the subject, but you've got your degree and you're able to go out and now teach. And that's what a black belt is. And so we sometimes put too much emphasis on this black belt that we're all super fighters, and not everybody is. I know there's a lot of guys that beat me.
Todd, your point.
Continuity of instruction is why we don't have continuity of the art.
Good point. Good point.
You know, Mr. Knatzer hit it on the head. Things are not passed on from the originator, from the progenitor of the system. And when we, you know, if you go to a classical piano lesson, you're going to learn a particular method, and they're going to teach you some of the history of that method. I have a student who practiced the Suzuki method. He went to Japan and studied for 2 years, yada, yada, yada. But the point is that it's a very disciplined process through which they are taught and through which that information is passed from teacher to student. And the biggest thing that I see with regard to the break in the continuity of instruction is the quality of the teacher, which goes back to what Mr. Knatzer was saying. People are too eager to jump out with, you know, it's funny, I see all the time people have posted, oh yeah, I'm a such and such, I got 10 years of experience in the arts. Okay, great, you're just getting started. Welcome to the arts, right? Instead of, okay, now I've been doing this, I've been teaching for, let's see, myself, I've been teaching now since 1986, teaching. So, and so now I think I'm getting better at teaching anyway, right? I still got to work on the art, but I'm getting better at teaching. And so, and to be honest, I think that there's a, it kind of mirrors or mimics life. As we go through life and we're young and we're dumb and we're eager to do all these things, and we think very little of history and the things that are important to older people that we're listening to, going, really? Why? And then as we get older ourselves, as we mature and we come into that maturation where we're seeing the relevance of that history and the historical information and the knowledge of what history is and what it does. And so that's what happens, I think, with some people in Kenpo as they mature in the arts. Now, personally, when I picked up the Infinite Insights in 1989, I read through them, and I've held them dear and near ever since, and used much of the material to teach. But so anyway, so yeah, a continuity of instruction, of information. That's the problem with the continuity of, where we're at.
Do we have a problem, Derek? Because, you think about this, Derek, you look at, you're lucky because you have a heritage there. Your father, your lineage is there with Huck, Trejo. You've had some of the greatest Kenpoists instruct you. So you're a little more advanced than, or better off than, say, a lot of the other students that are out there. But product compliance there is reinforced in you all the time when you hang out with these guys. Why can't that be across the board?
You know, a big part of that came and stems from never played politics, always was able to train with and cross train with whomever, whenever. There was never any egos about it. I always had permission from Uncle Huck, Uncle Frank, Lee Wedlake. I mean, the list could go on for miles of guys that I've trained with and under and have a lot of respect for. You know, as Kenpoists, and the longer that we've been around this kind of stuff, you know, you start grabbing from our web of knowledge and the tools that we like and things that we like from certain people, and we put them in our belt and keep what we like and toss away what we don't, but we don't forget what we were shown. I really think that the big difference between now and then is when I came up, there was no kid classes, okay? Mr. Durga started teaching in '86. I got my first yellow belt in '86, okay? So all the guys that were training that I was working out with, I was doing the same exact thing they were. They did not, especially having the name Hibben across the front of my gi, they did not pull any punches. I had to come up the old school way. And now to get somebody and a student to come through the door that wants that and is willing to train that way, and the old school kind of, call it the old salty way, to me, that's just what it is. And I think that we lack a whole lot of that today with you know, a lot of people don't want to get handsy, and I get that and understand that. And but there's a time also where it's very much needed, and I think that's lost. And not only our passing on of our art and our tradition and through our forms and everything else, there's something to be said too about our Friday night classes of shutting the door and banging it out.
Zach, continuity. How do we reinforce that across the board? Because there's so much personalization that we're seeing in Kenpo. And I'm not saying that's bad, but it violates a lot of Kenpo principles and rules.
I think it all goes back to like what Derek was saying about you know, that old school training and just hammering, and I teach what I was taught and reinforce that, but you also have to have the proper mindset, which we've delved on a little bit, and have that empty cup and be willing to learn and be willing to talk to people. I know when I was studying with Mr. Trejo, that he always pushed me to have meetings and privates with Huck and other people, and to learn and have the ability to learn. And he always instilled in me, as well as you, to appreciate what you've learned and keep it alive by teaching it and teaching our history and moving it forward.
Can we fix this, Dennis? Can we fix the continuity? Can we return? What is the standard of the forms? Individuals that are trying to personalize this, Todd, they're just, this is my style. This is the way I do it. Or you watch them, they could perform out in, some of them like just to go to tournaments. I'm not faulting it because I went to tournaments, but they go there and they're reinforced because they may have to modify their forms for tournament performance versus lessons inside the school, the traditional way it was done.
And then they get a first place and holy cow, I'm the best and I don't ever have to change what I did.
What's wrong with that, Dennis?
Then they can start using corn cobs.
What is that? What it is? Is that what's going to take, Jason? Are you just sitting there collecting? Are you a trophy kind of guy?
Me? No. I competed in a tournament last year for specific reasons. Before that, my last one was 2011. Before that was in 2000, and before that was in 94. So I'm not interested in collecting trophies or medals or anything like that any longer.
Let's change that mindset right away, okay?
Why is that?
Well, because you're good. You need to be out there. Otherwise, look what we got to watch.
Well, here's the good part that Dennis is bringing up, Jason. By your participating in an open tournament, we can see where it should be because as you perform it in the traditional sense of way it is.
That's true.
Whether people like it or not, it's sort of a reminder that you go to a tournament these days, and you have these acrobatic types of forms. You have these specialty type of forms. Dennis knows what I'm talking about. Anybody's been to a tournament knows exactly what I'm talking about.
As we call it, we call it in Arizona, El Toro Poo Poo.
And you see that, and I mean, literally, you modify your tournament performance completely different than what it is for your actual training. I'll give you this example. When I was coming up, I was just doing sparring in the Pasadena school, and Frank was encouraging me to fight more. And so I'd go into tournaments, and then I found myself, forgive me if I offend anybody here, but personally, I found myself committing, making what I would do in a tournament, I would never do in a real life situation. I mean, that's the way I'm going to fight. And I went back to this, hey, I'm just going to go what I need to do. And I was getting disqualified because I'd be knocking guys out rather than getting points with a jumping back knuckle or a sweep and a takedown. Man, Frank taught me, you punch him in the face, you sweep the leg, and you slam his head right into the ground. Well,
only tournament
on a mat. You do that in a
tournament. Only tournament I was never disqualified from was the IKCA.
Really?
1 year. The only one I wasn't disqualified from.
I just told Trejo I'm not gonna fight tournament style because it just ingrains bad habits for me, and I don't want bad habits because that counts. The tournament thing, I don't have to worry about a guy punching me in the face.
Very true.
If I do sparring, I'm going for broke, man. That's real deal shit. Sorry.
Sure. Oh yeah, sure. Totally agree.
Let's not lose our art. Let's embrace it. We're the torchbearers. This is the 30th anniversary of Mr. Parker's passing. We all know that. And as Dennis said, he gave us an art that he worked very hard on and developed, and it grows. It's not tangible. It's an intangible entity that can grow with any one of us. And if you think about it, I've learned so much when I talk to Todd or to Knatzer, and now Jason telling me he's got a work ethic when he comes to rehearsing, coming to practice, or when he's spending
absolutely
pain. So,
right.
It's important. And then I'm not lucky to have the reinforcement like Derek because he has his father, and then I'll have Huck come in and snap him a few times. But I can do that to Zach. I can do that to Zach. Sorry, Zach. Zach knows what I'm talking about. Beating it in the right way, and it's important. So we can't lose sight of our future because it is our art that is passed on. But each of us, it's been tailored to us. It's now time to pass it on. We want to pass on the right knowledge, and there are people out there. So it's time to say thank you to everybody. We've been on for 2 hours. Let's go with this. Derek Hibben, thank you very much. Give our very, very best to your family, your mother, your father. And we really appreciate you coming and sharing that. Zach Carter, always giving us insight and whatnot. Shane, it was a pleasure meeting you. Thank you very much for participating. You are always welcome, sir, and you will have the right answer because it comes from you, and that's important. Jason, a real talent, and I look forward to seeing more from you and hearing more from you. I know you do some great things. And Todd Bergen, is always a pleasure. You have so much knowledge, and it's just, we need to draw from people like you. And finally, Mr. Knatzer, always a guiding light, a real stable individual that can give you direction and help you to understand things and he's really improved my vocabulary in Kenpo. So salute to you, sir. So thank you very much on behalf of the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame, the Art of Forms, Kenpo style. We will visit this discussion, and we'll probably talk about the comparisons of the first 3 forms, and then we'll go into 4, 5, and 6, and then just what our thoughts are for the future of Kenpo. So with no further ado, thank you, everyone. God bless you. I hope you have a great weekend, and thank you for participating.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Paul.